Hello and welcome to lecture 33, where I'll be showing you how to set up the render camera to create the proper render settings like depth of field and aperture sizes. So first of all, you would need to adjust your framing if you want to have something more portrait-like. So the first thing you got to do is go to your render settings, go to the common settings and choose your output resolution, which is defined by width and height. So based off that, you will get your frustum. So if I go to my perspective view here, you can see that on the left is my actual render camera and the black outline is my render frustum, my resolution gate. And you can see that when I move my camera, obviously that is moving as well. So if I move this, it's zooming in and out. And if I want to have different perspective, obviously you would need to adjust your camera, change your aim, and something like all these things. So if I want to go something more like this for my final render, we can easily just do that by adjusting our camera. So that would be the first step. Let's just save this as another bookmark. So I have a few bookmarks here. Bookmark 4 is the previous one we had, and bookmark 5 is the new one. So on the camera itself, you have several attributes. You can play around with the focal length, which is essentially the field of view. So the lower this value, the more it becomes fisheye and it has more range. So I think a focal length of 18 is almost 90-degree angle. So you can see that by doing that, I have a pretty fisheye lens. And obviously, depending what you need, you would need to adjust this. So I had something on 55, which is 36% angle of view. And the rest is not that important. For now, the far and near clip is, if it's automatically rendering that, if I have a far clip of maybe 50 units, you can see that it is actually clipping my render. And if I do maybe 250, 800, you can slowly see on the left that I can see some foreground elements. So 1500 would give us the car, and if I just slide those values maybe to 1250, you can see my car is being cut off. So you can adjust this to optimize your renders, but on default, a bigger value is alright because Arnold can easily handle lots of geometry, so that's no problem. Or if you don't care at all, you can just disable auto render clipping planes and it does not matter. But this should be all. And another thing I like to do is render depth of field for still renders. You can obviously also render that in 2D, so you would output a Z pass, so in comp you could adjust it, but it's always better to do it in the render just because it's more accurate and it's not a fake 2D blur. But nowadays they got a lot better in compositing software to do the blur afterwards. But for this lecture, we will do it in the render. So on default, it is totally turned off. So how it works is you first of all enable depth of field, and then based off the focus distance, the image gets blurred or not. So what I always tend to do, I just create a locator. So I'm not sure, in other platforms it's different, other software packages it's different, but in Maya you just create a locator and you can position it wherever you want it to be in focus. So what I like to do is I want to create the front, the grill area in focus of the render. So I'm just displaying the wireframe and I'm snapping my locator to the wireframe position in the front here. You can see it takes a bit, but at some point it jumps here. And now you can see it's in the front of the grill area, and I want this area to be in focus. So again, different packages have different ways of doing this. In Maya, you can go to display, and you go to heads up display, and then you go to object details, and you can see that distance from camera is changing based on my zooming factor. So now you can see it's a value of 170, and in the render camera actually it's 894.68. so that is the value which we want to enter in our focus distance. So it's only what is selected. So let's just select this again, and remember what we have, it's 894.68. So go back to the camera and type that in. 894.68, and this should be our focus distance, 89468, and then 89468. And then the next thing would be aperture size. So an aperture size of 0 will not have any blur, but the bigger you make this, the more your image gets blurred. So let me show you how this works. So if I go to the render view and I go to maybe 50% resolution and I hit play, you can see the render is being set up. And to dial in my depth of field, what I like to do is I like to switch to a basic shading mode, which is very simple and very fast, but we can easily dial in our depth of field. So just by doing that and now enabling the depth of field and changing the aperture size to maybe something to 5, you can see that my background gets totally blurred, but my foreground, where I have my focus distance locator, it's very crisp and sharp. And obviously you can go crazy by increasing this to maybe 15, and you can see it's really blurry, which is totally not physical because it's a very crazy big aperture size. So what I like to do as well is just really make it a very subtle effect. So a value of 1 in this case is really subtly blurring the background. So you can see if I put a value of 3, you can see now it gets very blurry already, and I don't want that, it's way too strong. So let's just switch back to 75%, how it was before, and we can just see that it is way too much. So let's go back to 2, and even that I think is too much. So it should be very subtle. So this is a value of 0, which is off, and maybe 1, this is what it would look like. So even 1 might be a bit too much, so but we just keep it at that. So another thing which is important is the aperture blades, and I'm sure you have seen bokehs, and this is kind of how to control them. A aperture blade of 0 means it's a perfectly round depth of field bokeh. If you put it to 5, it is a kind of like a hexagon or an octagon, or so this would be an octagon, and 6 is a hectagon. So these things would add more triangles to your aperture, to your bokeh. You can make it a bit more round, so it's not fully parallel lines. You can bend them a bit. But all in all, this is all you gotta do. So if I would have some lights in the background or something which I can actually show you, if I render the shaded version, you can see our headlights in the front here are currently very crisp because our focus point is set to this guy. But if I change the focus point to be maybe 5000, so it's very far in the background, you can see that the lights get blurry and they get this nice shape. So if I play up the aperture to maybe 5, or maybe not so much, maybe 3, you can see that I'm getting this the shape of a hexagon. So if I have a value of maybe 0, you can see it's round here, and then a value of 5 maybe, which makes it a bit more edgy, especially if I have no curvature. You can really see the shape appearing here. So that is kind of what it's doing. So just pasting the previous values, so our lights in the front are nice and crisp. And this is all I have to show you for camera settings. So I hope this gave you a little insight on how to set up depth of field and how to play a bit around with your render render camera. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next lecture where I'll be talking about AOVs.